Welcome to one of the 5 parts of a very special series on technology in AP. In this session, we're focusing on working from home expense reimbursements, which, as we were discussing before we started, has turned into a really big issue. I believe most organizations don't have a working from home expense reimbursement policy, or at least they didn't before about a year ago. So let's dive right in. And I thought we'd get started with just a fun thing and talking about the craziest, the silliest, the most absurd reimbursement requests that you've seen or heard since people started working from home. And while it might be silly to some, it might make a lot of sense to others. So there's going to be a lot of opinions here. So Regina, how about we start to you and then go to Mandy?
Okay. Hey, I'm Regina Italiano. I'm with Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi. And really, Mary, I'm sorry, we haven't seen a lot of crazy things from home other than we have had a few ask for reimbursement for home internet expenses. To me, that's a little crazy personally because you already have that. So why would the college pay for that? We did offer hotspots for a few people because they live in a more rural area.
Right.
But that didn't seem too crazy to me. So
No.
our people have been really good about using common sense.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Mandy, have you been so lucky?
I have actually. I agree with Regina. We haven't got anything too crazy other than just, a few utility reimbursements that went beyond their normal bill. But as I said before we started, I do think they probably need to reimburse us for a new wardrobe to cover our expanding waistlines as we've gone through this work from home.
Yep. Of course, we might owe them money for the money we didn't spend on clothes from the last year.
Yeah,
so
well,
Lynn,
I bought plenty of leggings, so.
Yeah. Lynn, you talk to a lot of people. What do you hear?
Oh, there's a variety, Mary. I mean, to go along with what's been said, there's been utility bill requests, which, okay, that doesn't surprise me. The most surprising is when someone told me that they had employees working from home, but they had to go to the office just very occasionally. And on those occasions, they would request reimbursement for their mileage and for their parking fees and for the meals when they go into the office.
I think the IRS might have something to say about that.
That was an interesting one for sure.
Yep, but we're not going to discuss that. And Ellen joins us from across the pond. Are people, what's going on over there?
To be honest, it's pretty similar in that most people are behaving themselves and understand, what they're supposed to be being reimbursed for. And in fact, actually, Lynn, some people are the same as you, trying to get reimbursed for things which they really necessarily shouldn't be, going into the office and trying to get money for, perhaps having lunch, etc., while they're going into the office. That's been that we've heard that a few times, but most people are fairly compliant. The only slight, actually, it's actually a very strange thing that I have heard, and it came up at the event that we ran on Tuesday, as a lady working in the retail sector, and she said one of her team had actually tried to have their vet bill reimbursed because while working at home, the tangle of wires where they were working, and they had to work in the dining room, meant that their cat had crawled across the table, become tangled in these wires, and then had fallen onto the floor, causing the cat pain, injury, etc. And I say it's crazy, but actually the company did reimburse it because she produced this vet bill. And what could they say? They had a choice: you're lying, right, or it actually happened, and it was a valued employee. So they turned around and thought, well, okay, we're going to reimburse this vet bill. That's probably the strangest one that I've heard.
I agree.
But I think, to be honest, most people are compliant. They understand that what companies are going through at the moment, and what they themselves shouldn't be being reimbursed for. So I think most people are okay.
Okay.
But that's probably the strangest one.
Yep. I'm always afraid when you reimburse for that you're opening the door because I have this great philosophy in life in general, but definitely when it comes to expense reimbursements, what you do for one, you have to do for all. And anyway, okay. So this one, at least the first part, is mainly for Mandy and Regina. Does your organization have a working from home expense reimbursement policy? And if you do, when did you create it? And if you don't, do you think you should have one? And obviously the last part of the question is for Ellen and Lynn also. So Mandy, why don't we start with you this time, and then we'll go to Regina?
Sure. No, my company does not have a policy for right now. Hopefully that's not my internet that's being slow here. No policy, but we are in the process of creating one to accommodate going forward. But they have provided us with a stipend, I think on two separate occasions, a stipend, make sure they had everything that once we were working at home.
Okay, so a stipend. I also heard from a number of companies that they gave, like you say, a stipend at the beginning of the whole process to cover wires and additional incidentals. Regina, you did mention the hotspots. What else?
We do not have a policy written either. We are looking at it just because we do have a few that will continue to work from home. We are actually, as I mentioned, we're in Mississippi, and so we're wide open. We're back to work. We're in the office. We do have a few people who are still working remotely. Obviously, I'm at home today doing the podcast, but for the most part, we're back. So it's not going to be a huge issue for us, except for a few people. We are providing anything they need, they can get. If they need electronic equipment, if they need office supplies, whatever, we're still doing that. But other than that, we're not really having an issue.
Okay, Ellen, what do you see across the pond?
Well, I think it's something that most companies are getting to grips with. Most of the larger companies have a policy in place already. They had a policy in place prior to lockdown, because working from home has been something that not perhaps the finance teams, but as a company as a whole have been doing for some time. So I think most companies already had a policy in place, but I think certainly since lockdown, a lot of them have reevaluated that and have created one. I really think it's very important to, and I think going back to what you said at the beginning, really it's a matter of having consistency. You need to make sure that, like you said, what you're doing for one, you're doing for the other, and without a proper policy, you can't really have that level of transparency, and you don't want to be accused of favoritism or whatever, because if you do that, then you're opening the door to all sorts of other problems and HR issues, etc. So it just makes sense to have a proper written down policy. And to do that, I think that it also makes sense to realize that we're not just talking about a policy, we're talking about people and people's lives, and to bear that in mind. And I think you have to have a period of consultation in order to do that.
So Lynn, what do you hear?
I've heard a variety. I don't think in the United States anyway that a lot of organizations have that work from home policy.
Right.
Maybe, but just the people I have spoken with have indicated they did not. So when all these different expense requests, reimbursements were coming in, it was largely left up to the managers to make the decision of whether or not to approve something, which, as we've just said, that can open the door to other issues as well.
Okay. So let's talk about now where working from home expenses are being reimbursed from and where they should be. Should they be on an expense report? Should they be put on a company P card? What do you think? And I've heard some fun stories about people who have purchased something that they know wouldn't fly on the expense report, putting it on a company card. I'm sure Lynn is going to have something to say about that. But Regina, what are you folks doing, and what do you think should be done?
Ours, it's a mixture. Some are purchasing themselves and turning it in on an expense report. Some are doing it on the credit card. And then some are having it billed and invoiced to us, which we're working with them. I did work with our supply vendor to have certain supplies actually shipped to people's homes during this time, while they were at home. So that worked out great. I encourage them not to put it on the credit card. Either do it directly through the vendor and have it invoiced, or purchase it themselves and just do it on an expense report, just to keep the credit card clean.
Okay. All right, Mandy, what have you folks been doing?
Yeah, it's been a mix, much like Regina as well. Most of it's done on an expense report, and that way we can keep tabs on how much each individual is spending. But we have had a few, like, the utility bills, the internet that we're reimbursing, that's done kind of on an invoice because it's a consultant that doesn't have access to our expense report system. But I agree, we like to keep it off of the P cards as much as possible.
Okay. All right. So, Lynn, what are you seeing? And
Well,
what
of course,
do you think it should be?
well, I might have a different opinion, although I think even to back up a little bit before answering your question, I think an organization really has to have some key goals in mind. One, you want it to be efficient, especially for accounts payable. You want to prevent employee, abuse or misuse of the policy if there is one. And you do want to address employees' biggest home office shortcomings within reason. So with all that being said, I do think there are various procure to pay processes that could be used. And it really depends on the size of an organization and how many work from home expenses that they're anticipating. So if you're a smaller organization and don't have that many, I can see where just the simple expense reimbursement request process, funneling through AP can work just fine. But if you start getting into larger and larger organizations, I'm okay endorsing a company card or a purchasing card for these expenses. However, with that being said too, I think a number of things have to be decided and communicated upfront about what's allowed. Are there any approved vendors? Exactly what can or cannot you do with the card? Even if there's a special budget code that you want to use to track for these sort of expenses. So if you can get all your ducks in a row, I think a P card can be useful for this. So you're not having to do countless expense reimbursements. But again, every organization has to look at the different factors, within their own location to figure that out.
Okay. What do you see, Ellen?
I agree. No, essentially, Lynn, that's pretty much exactly what I would say as well. And it really does depend on the size of the company and the number of employees that you've got. What's going to be value for money for one company isn't going to be value for money for another. Ultimately, what you need is traceability and accountability. And you need to have that visibility and authorization levels as well. All those things can be really well controlled if you're doing that via a P card or a virtual P card. But it really does depend. If you're a very small company, you're probably not going to invest in that. But I think that for maybe a larger company with a lot of employees working from home, that's something that you can look at. And you might even want to invest in some other automation software, something like, for example, other vendors are available, SAP Concur, for example, or you might want to go down the route of mobile capture. So, for example, if you've got employees who are consistently working late, perhaps, I don't know if you have Deliveroo, I guess you have Deliveroo over there, I don't know, but they deliver food to your
Oh yeah, we're
to
going
your
to talk
door.
about that. We're going to talk about that.
Oh, okay. Okay. I won't go too far. So ultimately, I think it depends on the size of the company and what you're hoping to get out of it and what your business outcomes are in terms of expenses. But I think you just overall need to have accountability, visibility, traceability.
Okay, so since Ellen mentioned the delivery service and the one that we have DoorDash over here, I think we have Grubhub, we have a number of them. So what do you do, guys, or what do you think you should do when you see a Grubhub or DoorDash or whatever the delivery service is of fast food when the employee says they've worked through lunch or 12 hours and it's a dinner expense? How do you address that? Who am I going to pick on? Mandy, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I go with like the typical expense for meals reimbursement is only if you're traveling. If you're at home, you're going to eat lunch anyways. It's something you're going to be provided for yourself. And if you're working so late that it goes into dinner, I mean, that's something that you would typically provide for yourself as well. I mean, my kitchen is like 3 foot from my desk, so I have no problem getting up to make myself something for lunch. So I don't agree that those types of items should be reimbursed.
Okay. All righty. I expect we're going to hear a lot about this issue. Regina?
That would be a hard no. You're going to eat anyway, unless you're dieting. We're not doing that. That's just a no.
So
You're
that's
not
a no.
traveling, you're at home, go to your kitchen.
Right. Okay. Ms. Larson?
This time, I definitely agree with Mandy and Regina. I don't see where that fits in terms of a reimbursable or a company expense. So that's my simple answer, Mary.
A hard no.
Yeah. See if Ellen thinks differently, being especially in a different country.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a bit different in the UK. I mean, I think it depends. Obviously, lunch, you're at home and you are probably within a few feet or whatever from your kitchen. So I think that's fine. But I think it's probably something which should be in the company policy,
Right.
and about how long you're expected to work, without being able to, provide yourself with something. And it depends where you're working as well. If you literally are working from home, then you probably got a bit of a hard fight on your hand to be reimbursed for that, because it's food you probably would be providing for yourself anyway. But I think that there could be a legitimate claim for it if you're working extended hours, for example. If you're working after 7:30 and you're consistently doing that, you might be able to put forward a claim for something like a pizza delivery, for example, because if you're consistently working from home for a period of time and you're on your own, you could legitimately say that you haven't been able to get out to the shops, this, that, and the other. And you could, therefore, like you would be able to do in the office, if you were working from an office up to a certain point, or 7 o'clock in the evening, for example, then you would be able to have that evening meal reimbursed. So I think that you could probably make a claim for it to some extent if you're doing the same from home. Might be a little bit of a harder claim to do, I don't know, but I think you probably could have some kind of legitimate claim to it. And the thing that I was going to say earlier, Mary, was about the routing of that if you've got a mobile capture as well, the routing of that through to your ERP system. But again, that depends on a rather larger organization and what kind of end-to-end P2P process you've got built in. But things like that are starting to become more commonplace, and over probably the last 18 months really have grown quite a lot as well, percentage-wise. That people could, you could go to a restaurant, put that onto your company mobile, it goes straight through, and you can route that through to your ERP system and get that automated and agreed and approved according to the levels within your organization. So things like that are becoming more commonplace.
I think that the next year or two are going to be quite interesting. We haven't talked about expense reimbursement issues that much, but I suspect it's going to come to the forefront. Okay, so real quick, we're going to go through, in your personal opinion, where do you think working from home expenses should be put? Whether it's for, a monitor, an electric bill, or food delivery. Should it go on an expense report, a company card, submit an invoice, some combination, what? And this time, why don't we start with Ellen and work our way backwards, because I'm always picking on Regina and Mandy to start.
Yeah, I think it's a combination, and I think it very much depends on what you've got within your organisation, and again comes back to what we've already talked about in terms of visibility and accountability. Not every company is wanting to go down the P card route, but it makes absolute sense for some to stop some maverick spending, which we know has happened, and it makes sense in terms of being able to do the kind of reporting that you need. So, I mean, I do think it's a combination. there probably will be some time of settlement or settling down, because once we've been doing this for a year, 18 months, and going forward, we may be able to see a lot more, well, okay, are we going to be having XYZ employees staying at home all the time, or are they going to be doing some kind of hybrid? And when that settles down, I think you may be able to take a more longer term view on what you want on what you want to be doing and the route you want to be taking. But I think it's about consistency as well, consistency and accountability, and being able to trace people.
Lynn?
Yeah, I like, Ellen, what you were saying. All of that is so true. And I do think that organizations where they might have been flailing about a little bit when the pandemic started and how to handle things, I think, just with the, movement of time or the progress of time, that organizations will come to some decision making to make a little bit, more firm decisions, I guess. Or at least one would hope so, to get at what you said, Ellen, about it being just consistent and traceable and everything else. And I think, Mary, you had even asked one time or wondered out loud between the two of us, like, should it be a travel policy component?
Right.
Should it, and I think it should be a standalone policy. And I think the expenses certainly can get captured a number of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Mandy, what's your feelings?
I think it's really going to be dependent upon the type of reimbursement. So if it's for equipment, say you need an additional monitor, I think that needs to go through like the proper channels if you were to need a monitor while you're in the office. So in our instance, if we needed some kind of equipment like that, you contact the IT department or put in a service ticket. And then it comes, on the billing to you directly. For any other kind, we use, most of our employees have a company card that does get reimbursed or paid through Concur on the employee expense report. So I think that's a great way to track the expenses, make sure it's properly allocated to the correct project and the other GL coding, and keeps the employees, it goes through all the appropriate approval processes as well. So they have their manager approval, their finance liaison's approval before it gets paid out.
Okay. All right. And Regina?
I agree with Mandy. I think it depends on what the expense is, how large it is. Obviously, you don't want an employee having to, out of pocket, pay for a piece of equipment. When we do have proper channels for that, they would go through the IT department for any type of laptops, monitors, whatever. If it's normal office supplies, we do have our office supply vendors set up where they can deliver to the home and invoice us. Anything else they can, the majority of our folks do have the P card, so they can charge that, or if it's small enough and they, for whatever reason, don't use the P card, we can do it on an expense report and just reimburse them. But they do have to follow all the proper channels. They have to go through their budgeting manager to get the approvals, all of that. And none of that has changed. It all follows through, and we do say no if it's something that's not in line with our normal policies.
All right.
Mary, if I can add on to that,
Sure.
I think if you're allowing a mix, the only drawback is you could get an expense reimbursement request for something someone already put on a P card and it was paid by the company. So it gets a little messy unless you have some clear-cut lines and limits.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. One more place for us to make duplicate payments. All righty.
Exactly.
I'd like to point out that if you want any more information about these ladies and or their companies, there's a link. There are links in the show notes below to either their LinkedIn profiles or their companies, whichever is more relevant. Now I've got a little bit more complex question, but before I do that, I'd like to take a moment to invite you to subscribe. And if you are watching on YouTube, ring that bell on the top to be alerted whenever we post new episodes. All right. Now this one's a little bit more, I don't know, whatever. How would you address the following? And I understand that there are a wide variety of opinions on this. An employee who has an ergonomic chair in the office only has the kitchen table and a hard kitchen chair to work from. So without pre-approval, they go out and they purchase an ergonomic chair which costs about $995 US and let's say 750 pounds sterling, and submit it for approval. What would you do? Would you reimburse for it? And would your actions be different if it had been approved, even though it was not authorized by the policy? And Regina, let's start with you.
It would have to be approved, obviously. Anything that gets paid has to be properly approved. Me personally, I would have a problem with it unless they were going to permanently be working from home. We are small enough at Millsaps College that we can discuss things personally, one-on-one, go through, the real problem, the real issues with why did you get this chair? Why did you think that was okay? That type of thing. But it would have to be completely across the board approved before they would be reimbursed for that.
Okay. Mandy?
Okay, so I've got, just a little bit of background with what my company did here. They allowed us, since they were forcing the work from home at the beginning,
Right.
they allowed us to make trips into the office, as long as that was approved, to get anything that we needed for home. So like here, I'm at my kitchen table, but I have my very comfortable chair, and I brought my standing desk as well. So when we go back or go into our hybrid, those things, if I want them in both places, then I'm going to be responsible for setting up my home office to where it's comfortable for me. So, my question with that chair is, did that employee have the availability to go into the office and pick up the one that was already provided by the company for them? And,
Okay.
then I think it would be a discussion on whether or not the company would reimburse for that unapproved.
Okay. Lynn, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, there are a few factors, and one, Mandy, I've heard of other organizations doing what you said your company did, so that's not that unusual, I don't think. But I think we also have to think about the legal aspect, the ergonomic aspect, and if an employee truly does not have any sort of what would be considered proper accommodations in their home, there could be future lawsuits if they're forced to work from home and a company won't reimburse them or pay for ergonomic related things, because then you can start claiming kind of workman's comp and some other injuries related to that. So that's one factor. I am interested, Mary, if there's time on hearing from Mandy on does everybody have to trot their things back to the office then, or are they just paying for them and then the office itself will get some new accommodations? But yeah, I do think you have to think about the legal aspect, the workman's comp aspect, and just so many different factors. And I'd be interested what Ellen has to say on this topic too.
So let me just dive in and say that I had this conversation. I don't remember who I had the conversation with because it was a while ago, and they said they were reimbursing for it, but the employee was told that if they left the company, they were going to have to bring that chair back to the office. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds fairly reasonable, but I think that in the UK, most of the companies I've spoken to have done a fairly similar thing to what we've just been talking about. That employees had the opportunity to go into the office and pick up the equipment that they wanted or that they would need, and bring that home with them. And in most cases, where that's need to be replicated in the office, it's been replicated there. So rather than the employee having to traipse it all back into the office with them whenever they go, it's already being looked at in the office anyway. But I think that sort of going back to the original question, I think that for me the deal would be, why didn't that employee have a conversation first of all? And I think it does go back to let's have a handbook or something which is available that people can easily access, and then they don't have to have any awkward conversations, because nobody wants to have an awkward situation where you've got to speak to somebody about how much money they spent on a chair, which, as you say, it might bring up some conversations around, well, actually, I've got quite a bad back, as you were saying, Lynn. People don't necessarily want to have those kind of relatively personal conversations. But if there is something, a policy and a handbook to hand, which they know they shouldn't necessarily be spending $900 on a chair, then that can be had beforehand. And I would like to think that in most companies, they were, they were personal enough that you can go and speak to somebody and say, why do you particularly need this chair, for example? I don't know. But I think that's the main thing. I mean, why is somebody thinking that they can essentially be maverick and go off and buy something for themselves? Because then you have other issues which come to mind, thinking, well, okay, if you think it's okay to do that, what other things do you think it's okay to do?
Right.
And I think you just want to try and avoid all of those situations and be a little bit more upfront with your employees and have them feel that they're able to be upfront with you about what they need as well. So I think that the policy handbook just circumvents some of those awkward conversations that you might have to have otherwise. Nobody wants to do things retrospectively.
Right. Mandy, do you want to respond to Lynn?
Oh, sure. I do want to point out, though, that we were given a rather large stipend at the end of 2020 just to cover anything like that we might need for our home office that we weren't able to pick up from our office location. So as far as I know, though, the company, we're still working on that policy on whether or not we're going to have to bring everything back. But, I know my standing desk was quite expensive. And since I've brought it home, I have used it like I normally would if I were in the office. So I will have to have my fiance cart that back for me because it's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
But,
And we had a lot of people who brought home their 2 screens.
yeah, we'll see now at the beginning of that.
Several.
Well, in March, before we closed the office, they kind of took an inventory, and everyone that didn't already have an extra monitor, they ordered them through IT. So we had our monitors at work, and then we were each given an additional monitor to bring home. So, and then each new employee that we bring on automatically gets 2.
That's nice. That's very nice.
Yeah.
I think that's a big issue. All right. So we've talked about food. We've talked about pricey equipment, if you will. How would you address other questionable reimbursement expenses made while employees were working remotely? And Ellen, because I know at some point you're going to have to get off, why don't we start with you?
I think it goes back to seeing people as people and making sure that you've got them at the heart of your business, really, because I think it's very easy when you're looking at things in terms of facts and figures, which obviously we all need to do, but to forget why people are doing things. Usually there's a reason why people are doing things. For example, the person who, in theory, bought that chair, no doubt there was a reason for them doing that. So I think you have to go to the heart of it and say, and actually speak to your team. And I think that's one of the things which has been quite difficult during the course of the pandemic, is to have those personal conversations. But you need to try and make sure that you are and meeting with them over Teams or Zoom on a regular basis, and understand what the issues and problems are. Because not everybody's got the same kind of home setup as
Right.
the next person,
Right.
and that goes also to their family setup too. There's a fairly large construction company within the UK, and they've been very good at dealing with the mental health of their remote team as well, and making sure that they fully understand. Because I think there were a particular employee who had been working up until that time really well, very positive, and their output massively went downhill. And on further conversation, they found out that this person was working within a home environment where they were actually sharing a house with various people, and having to work from their bedroom. And that another person had completely different working hours and was quite prone to playing very loud music. So unless you have those kind of conversations with your team, you're not going to find out about it. But they were very good and very flexible and provided all sorts of equipment. In fact, a work mobile phone, which they didn't have before, and actually provided them with better broadband. It so happened that everybody in the house benefited from
Right.
that, but they felt that was fine.
Yep.
Because obviously they're looking after their own employee.
Right.
And then made sure that they had regular catch up in terms of mental health, daily to begin with, and then went to weekly, and the person's productivity levels have gone up accordingly. So I think it's just really trying to find out why people are behaving the way that they do. Not everything is as simple as routing through technology and ticking various boxes. That needs to be done, but what that is actually, the reporting that comes out of that should give you indications to behavior that we as humans can then react on.
The broadband issue, Ellen, I've heard from a number of people over here, especially if you have young professionals who are sharing an apartment. I had one woman tell me, I think there were 5 in the apartment, which was normally not a problem, but when they were all working from home, all trying to be on that broadband, it was slow. Lynn,
Yes.
what do you say about questionable reimbursement expenses?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to, is there a policy? What does the policy say? For so many organizations, they continue, at least I've heard from people who have said their organizations continue to allow the managers to make the call. So with that being said, what authority does like AP have to either approve or deny or question a purchase? And so that's maybe the more of a philosophical question, but it's one that needs to be answered. What's the authority of AP? And just to bring up something Ellen was saying, even with the mobile phones, and Mary, going back to your question at the beginning of kind of crazy expense requests,
Right.
I had a company contact me and said, prior to the pandemic, they were paying for employees' cell phone usage when they were on the road. They were on business travel so much. Well, the pandemic started, they continued to submit their cell phone bills to accounts payable. And the company said, well, wait a minute, you don't get that reimbursement anymore. But the employee said, well, I'm still using my phone. Why can't I be reimbursed? But they said, well, now you can go to Zoom, you can go to Microsoft Teams, you can conduct phone calls in a different way. So anyway, the question that you asked, Mary, I would just look at what authority does AP have and go from there. But sometimes you can't second guess what a manager says. Maybe just confirm, hey, did you read this? Do you know what you approved?
Right. Yeah. And also we go back to what you do for one, you have to do for all. So this is where a company policy would really come into play. Mandy, how do you address this issue?
I would just, stick to the policy. If there is anything that goes outside of that and there's been a case made by the employee as to why they need this reimbursed, then that's a discussion to have on an individual level with, proper management approval.
Okay. And last but not least, Regina.
So many things. So yes, I would go to the budget manager and like Mandy said, question, did you see this? Did you catch this? And then, we're personable. I would ask the employee without trying to touch on any HR related issues, obviously, but I would kind of feel them out and say, why do you need this? Can you give me a little heads up? Ellen, I had the same problem. We had back during shutdown, I had 5 people in my home, all working from home. I had my husband and I were working from home. My oldest son was teaching from home. And then I had a college student and a middle school student both doing coursework from home. So we had a lot of
traffic.
a lot of traffic on the internet. Everybody had their assigned space, and if you walked through that space, you knew not to talk. Don't disturb. It was crazy. But Mandy, we also were able to, I'm just touching on all the things.
It's okay.
We were able to go to our offices and pick up anything that we needed as well. So that was a huge help. But moving forward, if we see that there is a need, we try to reach out and get people what they need. We do have a good supply now in our IT department of any excess equipment that they need. And we started from the very beginning. If it was something that was being purchased COVID related, as even if it was equipment, extra monitors, whatever, we coded it that way so we could track it. Yay us. I'm proud of us for
Yes.
doing that, but it's it's a nightmare. It's gonna be a nightmare trying to get it all back, tracking it, making sure it gets back, all of that. But at least we know what we got due to the pandemic.
Okay, all righty. Well, that was very interesting. You may also like episode 91 on the gift card scam, which unfortunately continues. On YouTube, a link will appear to it momentarily on the left. And as always, we appreciate a thumbs up or a comment. Thanks, ladies. I think this was a great session.
Thanks, Mary.